Welcome to Fluent Daily, the English listening channel for advanced learners at B2 and C1 level. Every episode features a rich, flowing conversation in natural English on a topic that is genuinely worth thinking about: history, psychology, science, philosophy, and more. There are no simplified sentences here, no slow speech, no vocabulary drills. Just real English spoken naturally on ideas that matter. This is Fluent Daily. Let's get into it.
Today we have a great story, so let's get started right now.
What if I told you that you actually do not cry because you are sad, but rather you are sad because you are crying?
I mean, it sounds like a riddle. Or, maybe a typo in a psychology textbook.
Right. It completely shatters the fundamental way we experience our own lives. Because we have this deep, just unshakable intuition about how our feelings work.
Yeah, the classic cause and effect.
Exactly. Like something bad happens, we feel sad, and so our eyes water. But the research we are diving into today suggests that the causal arrow might actually point in the exact opposite direction.
Which is wild to think about.
It really is. The physical reaction happens first, and the feeling is just your brain playing catch-up.
Which is a deeply unsettling thought for a lot of people. I mean, it forces us to ask what a feeling actually is in the first place.
Right. Is it just biology?
Exactly. Is it a biological reflex? Is it a cultural invention? Or is it, just a story we tell ourselves to explain why our heart is suddenly beating out of our chest?
And that is the massive mission we are taking on today. So welcome to the deep dive. We are spending this time completely deconstructing the concept of human emotion.
It's a huge topic.
It is, yeah. We have this fascinating stack of sources pulling from over a century of neuroscience, psychology, and anthropology to answer a question that seems, so obvious to all of us, but really, really isn't. What actually is an emotion?
It is one of those questions that feels almost too simple to ask, right up until you try to actually write down a definition, then it gets incredibly messy.
Oh, for sure. So today we're going to explore how your brain is literally constructing your feelings in real time.
And we'll look at why everything you thought you knew about reading facial expressions, like the stuff they use in airport security and modern artificial intelligence, might actually be built on a massive methodological flaw.
Which is just crazy. And we'll also explore how learning a new language can quite literally change the biological limits of what you are capable of feeling.
Yeah, the language stuff is just fascinating.
It really is. Okay, let's unpack this. Because the best place to start is with what we all just intuitively assume is true, the baseline.
Right. The literature usually refers to this as the folk psychological account of emotion.
The folk account. So it goes like this. You are walking through the woods and you see a bear. That's the perception phase.
Step one.
Right. Because you perceive a bear, you feel an overwhelming sense of fear. That's the emotion phase, step two. And because you feel fear, your body reacts.
Step three.
Exactly. Your heart rate spikes, your palms sweat, and you sprint in the opposite direction. Perception, emotion, physical response. 1, 2, 3.
I mean, it makes perfect logical sense. You can totally see why this was the default assumption for basically most of human history.
Yeah, the conscious feeling seems like the central driver of the whole event. You feel scared, so you run.
But over a century ago, the scientific community received a massive curveball that we are honestly still arguing about today.
Still arguing.
Oh, absolutely. So in 1884, the American philosopher and psychologist William James and a Danish physiologist named Carl Lange, who, by the way, was working completely independently, they proposed an idea that flipped that 1, 2, 3 sequence totally on its head.
The reverse causation.
Exactly what you mentioned at the start.
Yeah.
The James Lange theory basically argues that you do not see the bear, feel fear, and then experience a racing heart.
Okay, so how do they say it works?
They propose that you see the bear and your body responds automatically and immediately. Like your autonomic nervous system kicks in, your heart rate skyrockets, adrenaline floods your system, your muscles tense, all before you consciously feel anything.
Wow.
And then a fraction of a second later, your conscious mind perceives that massive bodily response. You feel your own racing heart, you feel your muscles tensing, and your brain labels that physical, biological experience as fear.
I have to be honest, even knowing the theory, it just feels totally backward.
It really does. It goes against everything we feel.
Right, like think about a fire alarm in a building. The James Lange theory is basically arguing that the loud ringing bell is what creates the fire.
That is a great way to put it, actually.
It's saying the physical alarm is the primary event, and the cognitive realization of the fire is just a byproduct of hearing the bell. I mean, wait, so I'm sad because I'm crying. Not the other way around. Is the alarm the fire, or just the body's loud bell telling the brain to panic?
Taking that fire alarm analogy just a step further, James and Lange would say that without the ringing bell-like, without the physical arousal, the concept of the fire wouldn't have any emotional weight at all.
It would just be a fact.
Exactly. William James actually wrote about this. He asked readers to try to imagine an emotion like intense anger, but to strip away all the physical symptoms.
Like being furious, but without the clenched jaw, the flushed face, the raised heartbeat.
Right. James argued that if you strip away all those bodily sensations, you are left with nothing but a cold, intellectual realization that something is wrong. There is no feeling left at all.
So the feeling is just the physical sensation.
That's his argument. The feeling is the physical sensation. This completely decenters the conscious mind. It turns our rich emotional lives into essentially an after-the-fact interpretation of a biological reflex.
Which totally explains why people push back so hard. I mean, nobody wants to be told they are just a passive observer of their own biological reflexes, you know?
Exactly. The pushback was intense, and it set off a scramble in the scientific community that lasted for decades.
Because if our bodily responses, the racing heart, the facial expressions, are the primary drivers of emotion, scientists naturally started asking a very logical follow-up question, right?
Yeah. They asked, well, if this is a biological reflex, is there a universal biological code for these emotions?
Like, does everyone share the same physical reaction?
Exactly. If I encounter a threat in New York and someone encounters a threat in Tokyo, does our biology run the exact same physical program?
Which leads us directly into a massive paradigm shift in psychology. Enter the basic emotions hypothesis.
Yes. This framework completely dominated the 20th century. But to understand it, we actually have to go back a little further to Charles Darwin.
Wait, Darwin? Like evolution Darwin?
The very same. In 1872, Darwin published a book called The Expression of the Emotions in Man and Animals. He spent a lot of time observing monkeys, dogs, and humans.
Okay, looking for similarities, I guess.
Right. And he noted that when a dog is threatened, it bares its teeth. When a human is furious, they might pull their lips back and bare their teeth in a very similar way.
Oh, wow.
So Darwin suggested that our emotional expressions are evolutionary artifacts. They are inherited biological traits, just like opposable thumbs or binocular vision.
So, under this theory, an angry face isn't something you learn from your culture. It's something you inherit from your primate ancestors.
That is the foundation, yes. Later, in the 1960s, a theorist named Sylvan Tompkins built on Darwin's work with something he called affect program theory.
Affect programs.
Okay.
Meaning, like, emotions are basically like pre-installed software on a computer.
That is a very accurate way to think about it, actually. Tompkins argued that we have these innate, hardwired neural circuits.
So they just get triggered automatically.
Exactly. You encounter a specific stimulus, a sudden loud noise, a physical threat, and it acts like a hotkey, automatically triggering a specific affect program.
Like hitting a button on a keyboard.
Right. The fear program runs, and it unfolds in a highly characteristic, totally predictable pattern. Your heart rate does this, your skin conductance does that, and your facial muscles contract in this exact specific configuration.
And this idea just gets supercharged by a researcher named Paul Ekman. I mean, if you've ever watched a spy movie where an interrogator analyzes a suspect's micro-expressions to see if they're lying, you are looking at Paul Ekman's legacy.
Oh, absolutely. The show Lie to Me was literally based on his work.
Oh, right, I remember that. So from the 1960s through the 1990s, Ekman developed a comprehensive theory that there are 6 basic biologically universal emotions. Well, 6 core ones: anger, disgust, fear, happiness, sadness, and surprise. But suggesting they exist is one thing. He actually had to prove they were universal. Right.
Which was a massive methodological challenge. I mean, Ekman knew that if he tested people in Western countries, skeptics would have an easy counter-argument.
Because of media and globalization.
Exactly. If someone in Chicago and someone in London both make the exact same face when they are sad, you can't prove it's biology. It might just be that they both watch the same movies, read the same books, and consume the same media.
Right. They could have culturally learned that facial expression.
So you have to find people who haven't seen the movies.
You need a completely isolated population.
Exactly. So Ekman traveled to the highlands of Papua New Guinea. He worked with the 4 people who were this isolated pre-literate society with almost zero exposure to Western culture, media, or outsiders.
That is a serious lengths to go to for a study.
Well, the logic was rock solid. If these people, who have never seen an American movie or an American face, can correctly identify the emotions on American faces, then those facial expressions must be a universal biological inheritance.
So how did he actually run the test? Did he just, like, walk up to people with a binder full of photos?
Essentially, yes. He showed them photographs of Western individuals, often actors, displaying these highly exaggerated archetypal facial expressions.
Like the classic drama masks.
Right. The wide eyes and open mouth for fear, the wrinkled nose for disgust.
And the results were historically massive, weren't they? I mean, the data seemed to show that these isolated populations recognized the expressions perfectly.
They did. They matched the wide-eyed fear face to a story about encountering a wild boar. They matched the sad face to a story about a child dying.
Wow. So it worked perfectly.
It seemed to. Ekman concluded that the recognition of these 6 basic facial expressions is completely universal. Every human, regardless of where they are born or what language they speak, supposedly shares this biological emotional alphabet.
The impact of that finding truly cannot be overstated. I mean, it resonated far beyond just academia. It gave us this profound sense of control and predictability, right? If emotions are just 6 universal programs, human behavior becomes quantifiable.
What's fascinating here is how this clean, neat biological box became accepted as absolute fact across multiple massive industries.
It shaped literally everything. Like, think about airport security. After 9/11, the TSA spent billions of dollars on a program called SPOT screening of passengers by observation techniques.
Right. They trained thousands of agents to look for the universal micro-expressions of fear or deception that Ekman had categorized.
It also influenced clinical psychology, helping doctors diagnose autism or schizophrenia based on a patient's inability to read these supposedly universal faces.
And we are still seeing the ripple effects today, everywhere. Modern artificial intelligence and emotion recognition software, like the algorithms that monitor customer service calls or try to gauge student engagement in a digital classroom.
Or even screen job applicants during video interviews.
Exactly. They are almost entirely built on Ekman's foundational assumption. They are literally programmed to believe that a scowl universally means anger, and a wrinkled nose universally means disgust.
But the New Guinea data seemed totally bulletproof for decades. It's one of those classic psychology studies that makes it into every single textbook. But, science is an iterative process. You always have to look at how the questions were asked in the first place.
Always. Methodology is everything.
And when researchers recently started pulling apart Ekman's original methodology, the bulletproof glass started to shatter, didn't it?
It did. And this brings us to the major plot twist in modern emotion research. Over the past 15 to 20 years, a neuroscientist and psychologist named Lisa Feldman Barrett has mounted a revolutionary challenge to Ekman's basic emotions paradigm.
Okay, so what did she find?
She and her colleagues didn't just disagree with his conclusions. They went back and looked at the exact mechanics of how those New Guinea experiments were conducted, and they found a critical flaw.
It comes down to how the participants were allowed to answer, right?
That's the crux of it. When Ekman showed those photographs to the 4 people in New Guinea, he didn't just hold up a picture and ask, "How is this person feeling?"
Wait, he didn't?
No. He used what is called a forced choice methodology. He provided them with a translated list of specific emotion labels: anger, disgust, fear, happiness, sadness, surprise, and he forced them to choose one of those predefined options.
Wait, so it was a multiple choice test?
It was a multiple choice test.
Oh, wow. That changes everything. If I show you a picture of someone looking vaguely uncomfortable and your only options are happiness, surprise, or disgust, you're going to pick disgust.
Exactly. Not necessarily because you instantly recognize the universal biological signature of disgust, but simply through a process of elimination.
Right. You know they aren't happy and they don't look surprised. Disgust is the only remaining bucket.
You've just identified the exact flaw Barrett pointed out. The multiple choice list acts as a cognitive scaffold. It subtly teaches the participant what the correct answers are supposed to be.
So it leads the witness, essentially.
Precisely. So Barrett and her team ran new cross-cultural studies. They went to isolated populations themselves, like the Himba tribe in Namibia, but they changed the methodology. They removed the multiple choice lists.
Just a blank slate.
Yeah. They simply handed the participants the photographs and asked for spontaneous descriptions. They literally just asked, "How is this person feeling?"
And what happens when you remove the multiple choice options? I'm guessing it falls apart.
the cross-cultural recognition rates just plummet. That near-universal agreement completely vanishes. Without the provided labels to guide them, people interpret these supposedly universal facial expressions in wildly diverse ways.
Give me an example, like how different are we talking?
Well, a Himba participant might look at what Ekman called a fear face, the wide eyes and gasping mouth, and categorize it as looking, as in the person is looking intently at something.
Oh, interesting. Not fear at all.
Right. They might look at a sad face and call it sick or tired.
Which completely shakes the foundation of the basic emotions theory. If expressions are universal, if an angry scowl in New York might just mean concentrating deeply in Namibia, what are they?
That is the million-dollar question.
Right. If they aren't biological reflexes, what is actually happening in our bodies? Barrett didn't just point out a flaw in the old model. She proposed a completely new framework, the theory of constructed emotion.
And to understand Barrett's theory, we actually have to look at a broader shift in how we understand the brain itself. It's a movement in cognitive neuroscience called predictive processing.
Okay, break that down for us.
For a long time, the dominant metaphor for the brain was a computer, or, a passive receiver. The idea was that you sit there, sensory information comes in through your eyes and ears, it travels to your brain processes it, and then reacts. Perception, then reaction.
Like the bear in the woods. You see the bear, the brain processes the bear, you react to the bear.
Exactly. But predictive processing argues that this is fundamentally backward. Think about it. Your brain is trapped in a dark, silent box. Your skull.
Right, it doesn't actually see anything directly.
It has no direct access to the outside world.
Yeah.
It only receives ambiguous electrical signals from your sensory organs. So its primary job is not reacting. Its primary job is prediction.
It's guessing.
Yes, guessing. Based on your past experiences, your brain is constantly generating models of the world to anticipate incoming information before it even arrives. It essentially hallucinates a reality and then uses the sensory data from your eyes and ears just to check if its hallucination is correct.
Let's ground this because it's a huge concept. Have you ever been walking at night and you see a shadowy figure lurking by a tree and your heart skips a beat, but then you get closer and realize it's just a weirdly shaped bush?
Yes, perfect example.
So your brain predicted a threat based on the context of a dark street. And it actually constructed the visual experience of a person until the sensory data finally forced it to update the prediction to bush.
That is a flawless example of predictive processing in the visual system. Now take that exact same logic and apply it to your internal organs.
Okay, how does that work?
Your brain isn't just predicting the outside world. It is constantly predicting the internal state of your body. It is receiving a continuous stream of sensory data from your heart, your lungs, your immune system, your gut. This internal sensing is called interoception.
Interoception. Just to make sure we have this, let's do a quick interoception check with you listening right now. If you're listening to this, take a second and try to feel your clothes resting on your shoulders.
It's usually something you ignore.
Right, until you focus on it. Or try to feel your own heartbeat in your chest without using your fingers to take your pulse. That subtle internal sensory stream is interoception.
Exactly. But here's the critical point in Barrett's theory. Those physical interoceptive signals do not have inherent emotional meaning.
What do you mean? A racing heart isn't an emotion?
No, a racing heart is not an emotion. It is just a biological change in blood pressure. Sweaty palms are not fear, they are just thermal regulation. These are purely physical sensations, just like the ambiguous visual signals of the shadow by the tree.
So how do they become an emotion? If the feeling isn't baked into the heartbeat, where does the emotion come from?
To turn that raw physical data into an emotion, your brain has to categorize it. It has to make meaning out of it. And it uses your prior experiences, the social context you were in, and your cultural learning to do that.
So it's building it.
Yes. An emotion is not a pre-programmed reflex that gets triggered. It is an active construction. Your brain is guessing what those physical sensations mean based on the context.
Think about it like cooking. Here's where it gets really interesting. Your racing heart, that raw interoceptive signal, is just flour. It's a base ingredient.
I love this analogy.
Right. It has no specific flavor on its own. Depending on the cultural recipe your brain decides to use, that exact same raw flour could become the bread of fear because you were walking down a dark alley and hear footsteps. Or that exact same racing heart could become the cake of excitement because you are strapped into a roller coaster at a theme park. The physical, biological ingredient, the racing heart, the adrenaline, is nearly identical in both situations. The difference is the predictive recipe your brain uses to categorize it.
The flower analogy is incredibly useful here. The flower is the interoceptive arousal. And if we look at it this way, it resolves so many of the anomalies that Ekman's basic emotions theory could never explain.
Like what?
For example, it explains why people do not reliably make a canonical fear face in real life. If you study people who are actually in terrifying situations, they don't always make the wide-eyed, gasping face.
Oh, right. Sometimes they just freeze.
Exactly. They might freeze and their face goes completely blank. They might scream. They might even laugh hysterically, which is a known trauma response.
Because there is no single biological fear program running. There's no one hotkey.
Right. There is no single universal output. Because fear isn't a single biological thing. It is a category your brain constructs on the fly to deal with a specific context. If freezing is the best way to survive the current context, your brain constructs that physical reality. If fighting is the best way, it constructs that. Both are categorized as fear, but the physical manifestations are entirely different.
It also completely explains why different cultures have wildly different emotional norms. If you are baking with different cultural recipes, you are going to get different emotional experiences from the exact same raw physical ingredients.
Now, it is important to note that this debate is still very active. We have to be balanced here. There are still evolutionary biologists who argue for a middle ground.
What's their argument?
They point out that we do see certain subcortical brain regions consistently lighting up for specific types of threats across mammals. Like a rat and a human both have neural circuitry designed to detect a sudden looming predator.
Right, there is some basic hardware there. But Barrett's point is that a threat detection circuit isn't the same thing as the complex, conscious human experience of fear, right?
Precisely. A reflex is not an emotion. Constructionism does a vastly better job of explaining the sheer variety of human experience, the massive cultural differences in how we feel, and the fundamental architecture of the brain as a prediction engine rather than just a reactive machine.
Okay, so if emotions aren't these neat little pre-programmed software circuits sitting in our heads, where exactly is all this happening in the brain? Because for a long time, the public had a very simple, easy-to-understand map of brain anatomy.
Oh, we had a very comforting map. For decades, the dominant model was Paul MacLean's triune brain, or the limbic system theory.
Oh, I've heard of the limbic system.
Right. He developed this in the 1950s and 60s, and it was popularized heavily by Carl Sagan in his book, The Dragons of Eden. MacLean proposed that the brain was essentially an archaeological dig site, divided into 3 distinct evolutionary layers.
Like an onion.
Sort of. At the base, you had the reptilian brain, handling basic survival like breathing. Above that, you had the paleomammalian brain, the limbic system. This included structures like the hippocampus, the amygdala, the hypothalamus, and the cingulate cortex. MacLean argued this whole middle layer was the emotional center of the brain.
And then wrapped around all of that, you have the newest layer, the neocortex, which handles rational thought, language, and logic.
Exactly. It is an incredibly compelling narrative. It perfectly maps onto our cultural mythology, right? It's the classic battle between the heart and the mind, just mapped onto actual brain tissue. We imagine the primitive, emotional beast of the limbic system trapped inside the rational cage of the neocortex.
It makes for a great story, The Beast and the Scholar.
The only problem is that modern neuroimaging over the last 30 years has proven that this clean layered division is a complete myth.
A myth. Completely.
Completely. Evolution doesn't work like a baker adding distinct layers to a cake. It modifies existing structures. There is no isolated emotional center in the brain, and there is no purely rational center that operates independently of feeling. The network is vastly more complex, highly integrated, and constantly communicating across all areas.
But wait, what about the amygdala? Because anytime you read a pop science article about fear or anxiety or trauma, they always talk about the amygdala acting like the brain's panic button. Has that been debunked too?
The amygdala's role has been heavily refined, largely thanks to the work of a neuroscientist named Joseph Ledoux. He spent years mapping out exactly how threat processing works, often using auditory fear conditioning in rats.
Okay, what did he find?
He discovered that the amygdala is incredibly fast. He mapped a subcortical low road, or a direct neural pathway from the sensory thalamus straight to the amygdala.
So sensory data goes straight to the amygdala before the conscious brain even gets a chance to look at it.
Yes. This is what allows you to jump back from a curved stick on a hiking trail, because your brain thinks it's a snake long before you've actually consciously realized it's just a stick.
Oh, that makes sense.
The low road is a rapid automatic course response. But Ledoux also mapped a high road. This pathway goes from the thalamus up to the sensory cortex for detailed processing and conscious recognition, and then down to the amygdala.
That's the pathway that lets you say, oh, it's just a stick, and your heart rate starts to calm down.
Exactly.
So it is a fear center. It handles the panic.
Well, this is where the science has shifted in the last decade. Yes, the amygdala responds intensely to threats. But as neuroimaging got more sophisticated, researchers noticed something really strange.
Oh, is that?
The amygdala also lights up for positively valenced, emotionally significant stimuli.
Wait, really? Like happy stuff?
Yeah. If you see something incredibly rewarding, like food when you are starving, or if you encounter something highly surprising or novel, the amygdala fires just as strongly as it does for a threat.
So it's not just the panic button.
No, it is much better characterized as a relevance detector. It is an alarm bell, sure, but the bell doesn't just mean danger. It means pay attention, this matters. It flags sensory input that is highly relevant to your survival or your goals, regardless of whether it's a good thing or a bad thing.
Okay, so if the amygdala is the relevance detector scanning for important stuff, what handles the actual subjective feeling part? If Barrett's theory is right, and our brain is constantly monitoring our internal organs, that interoception we talked about, to construct emotions, there has to be a physical bridge in the brain between the body's raw data and the conscious mind's feeling, right?
There is, and it has become one of the most intensely studied regions in modern neuroscience. It's a region folded deep inside the brain's lateral sulcus called the anterior insula.
The anterior insula.
Yes. If the amygdala is the relevance detector, the anterior insula is the primary processing center for interoceptive information. It is constantly reading the internal state of your body.
So this is where the James Lange theory from the 1880s, the idea that the body reacts first, and Barrett's modern constructionist theory actually meet on the physical map of the brain.
That is the core of it, yes. Both theories rely on the premise that the brain must read the body. And functional MRI scans consistently show that the anterior insula is highly activated during experiences of intense subjective feeling.
What kind of the feelings?
And what's fascinating is the huge variety of feelings it processes. It lights up for disgust. It lights up for physical pain. It lights up during intense cravings for food or drugs. It even lights up during experiences of social rejection.
Social rejection, like being excluded from a group game or getting dumped.
Yes. Because all of these diverse experiences, pain, disgust, craving, rejection, they all share a fundamental common thread. They involve an intense awareness of your internal physical state. When you are rejected, you physically feel it in your gut or your chest.
You literally feel heartbroken or sick to your stomach.
Exactly. The anterior insula is the hub that bridges that physical sensation with the conscious awareness of the feeling.
The research notes something really interesting about this, too. People who have naturally high interoceptive awareness, like the people who can easily feel their own heartbeat or notice subtle shifts in their digestion, they actually have stronger, more intense emotional responses.
It makes perfect sense if you think about it.
They are literally better at reading the raw data of their own bodies.
Right. The data supports that completely. Think about it in terms of the predictive processing model we discussed. If your anterior insula is highly attuned to those physiological signals, you have higher resolution data to feed into your brain's predictive models.
So you aren't just working with blurry, generic physical signals.
Right. You are getting a highly detailed readout. This allows you to construct richer, more nuanced emotional experiences.
Which brings us to a concept that takes everything we've talked about so far and applies it directly to how we live our daily lives. If our brains are actively constructing our emotions by categorizing our bodily signals, then the specific categories we have access to must be incredibly important.
They are crucial.
The vocabulary we use, the precision of our labels, it isn't just semantics. It dictates our biological reality.
Absolutely. This is the concept of emotional granularity. It refers to the degree of precision a person uses to differentiate among their emotional experiences.
Let's explore the extremes of this. Low emotional granularity versus high emotional granularity. What does a life with low granularity look like?
Someone with low emotional granularity experiences their internal world in very broad, undifferentiated strokes. If something goes wrong at work or they have a fight with their partner, they just feel bad.
Generically bad.
Yeah, it's a coarse-grained, generalized emotional state. They might collapse anger, sadness, anxiety, and fatigue into one giant murky bucket of negativity. When asked how they feel, the answer is usually just upset or stressed.
And someone with high granularity.
They represent their internal states using precise, differentiated concepts. They don't just feel bad. They can pause and identify that they are feeling irritated by a specific comment, as opposed to frustrated by lack of progress, as opposed to resentful about a past slight.
They can slice it up.
They draw fine, high-resolution distinctions between those states.
Now, a lot of people might listen to that and think, okay, sure, you have a better vocabulary. Does it really change anything to know the exact specific flavor of your bad mood? You still feel bad.
Oh, it changes everything. It literally changes your biology. Lisa Feldman Barrett's research on this is astounding. Studies show that high emotional granularity predicts better physical health, fewer days hospitalized for illness, higher resilience following adversity, and vastly superior emotion regulation.
We need to slow down on this point. Why? Why would knowing a bigger vocabulary word for my anger make my immune system stronger? How does a label change the biology?
Because precise labels give your brain specific instructions for action. Let's go back to the theory of constructed emotion. Your brain is a prediction engine trying to figure out what to do next to keep you alive and thriving.
Right.
If you just feel a generic, massive sense of bad, your brain doesn't know how to solve the problem. It doesn't have a specific target. So it just stays in a state of generalized physiological arousal.
Just spinning its wheels.
Exactly. Your heart stays elevated. Your cortisol levels remain high. You stay in a state of systemic stress. And chronic stress wears down your immune system and damages your cardiovascular health over time.
Ah, okay. But if I can pinpoint that I feel, say, frustrated.
The concept of frustration inherently carries a specific meaning. Frustration means that a specific goal you are trying to achieve is currently being blocked by an obstacle. Once your brain categorizes the raw physical arousal as frustration, it automatically knows the solution. Identify the block and figure out a way around it, or ask for help.
So precise categorization turns an overwhelming, generalized physiological tidal wave into a specific, manageable problem.
Exactly. It's actionable.
It's the difference between trying to fight a fog and trying to climb a wall. You can't fight the fog of feeling bad,
Yeah.
but you can climb the wall of feeling frustrated.
I love that. And this ties directly into the mechanics of how we manage these feelings. The literature highlights James Gross's process model of emotion regulation.
Oh, James Gross.
Yeah, Gross is a leading researcher in how we handle our feelings, and he splits our coping mechanisms into two broad approaches: antecedent-focused strategies and response-focused strategies.
Antecedent meaning before. So these are strategies you use before the emotion is fully formed.
Yes. Antecedent-focused means stepping in during the prediction phase, before the emotional construction is fully generated. This could be something simple, like situation selection.
Like just avoiding the problem.
Right. If you know that interacting with a certain coworker always makes you furious, you choose not to go to the optional meeting they're leading. You regulate the emotion by avoiding the trigger entirely.
Or attentional deployment, right? Like when you are watching a horror movie and you know a jump scare is coming, you just look at the floor. You change where your attention is focused to avoid the sensory input.
Exactly. But the most powerful antecedent strategy is cognitive reappraisal. This is reinterpreting the meaning of the situation itself to alter its emotional impact.
Changing the recipe for the raw flour.
Exactly. Let's say you have to give a major public speech. Your heart is pounding, your palms are sweating. You could interpret that interoceptive data using the recipe of panic. But with cognitive reappraisal, you consciously tell yourself, this pounding heart isn't panic. It is my body pumping oxygen to my brain and mobilizing energy so I can perform at my absolute best. You change the narrative.
And what about response-focused strategies? That's the other half.
That happens after the emotion has already been constructed and generated. You are already feeling it. The most common form of this is expressive suppression, inhibiting your outward behavior.
Oh, right. Biting your lip, hiding your tears, forcing a calm smile when you are actually furious.
The classic workplace survival tool.
Seriously, you sit in a meeting, someone takes credit for your work, you feel a massive spike of anger, but you can't just scream at them. So you push it down, you nod and smile.
We all do it. But when you compare cognitive reappraisal to expressive suppression in a laboratory setting, there is a definitive winner when it comes to human health.
Reappraisal's the winner, right?
By a landslide. Cognitive reappraisal is highly adaptive. When you reappraise a situation, it literally reduces the physiological stress response. Because you have changed the brain's prediction of what the situation means, your amygdala activation decreases, your heart rate calms down, your body returns to homeostasis.
And expressive suppression.
Expressive suppression, on the other hand, is terrible for you.
Because it doesn't change the internal state, it just hides it.
Right. It carries a massive cognitive load because you are actively fighting your own behavior. It actually leads to worse social outcomes because even if you think you are hiding it perfectly, people subconsciously sense the incongruence in your micro-behaviors and find you less trustworthy.
Wow, so it backfires socially too.
But crucially, it does not reduce the physical stress. If you are suppressing anger, your heart is still pounding, your blood pressure is still elevated, your cortisol is still spiking, you are just spending extra energy trying to hold the mask in place.
Think about that in the context of your own life. How often do you just try to push down a feeling instead of reframing it? The data says pushing it down isn't making it go away. It is physically exhausting your biology. It's draining your cognitive battery while leaving the stress hormones just flooding your system.
It is genuinely the least efficient way to manage your body.
So, if having precise emotional concepts, high granularity, the ability to cognitively reappraise improves our lives so drastically, it raises a fundamental question. Where do we get these concepts in the first place? We aren't born with an emotional dictionary pre-installed in our brain.
No, we definitely aren't. We get them from our culture. We get them from our language. And this is where the science transitions from neuroscience into sociology and linguistics in a really beautiful way.
This is my favorite part of the research.
Because if Barrett is right and emotions are constructed using the concepts our culture provides, then the cultural toolkit you inherit completely shapes what you are capable of feeling.
The linguistic research is just fascinating here. When you look across the globe, you find culture-specific emotions that completely defy Ekman's basic 6 categories. Emotions that simply do not exist in English.
And we have so many great examples of this.
Let's talk about some of them because they perfectly illustrate the concept. Schadenfreude.
Ah, classic German concept. It translates roughly to deriving pleasure or satisfaction from another person's misfortune or failure.
We have all absolutely felt this. You see someone who aggressively cut you off in traffic get pulled over by a cop a mile down the road, and you feel that little burst of joy. But we don't have a single unified word for it in English. What about amai?
Amai is a deeply embedded Japanese concept. It describes the deeply pleasurable feeling of dependence and indulgence by a close relationship partner.
Like leaning on someone.
Yeah, it's the warmth of allowing yourself to be taken care of leaning on someone else's affection without any guilt. It's often used to describe a child's reliance on a mother, but it extends completely into adult relationships too.
Or saudade in Portuguese. It is often described as a profound, melancholic longing for something or someone that is absent, perhaps forever. It carries a sense of nostalgia, sadness, and love all mixed together.
It's very poetic.
It is. Or hygge in Danish, that warm, cozy feeling of social togetherness, usually involving candles, warm blankets, and a sense of safe, intimate community against the cold outside.
Now, here's a crucial distinction to make. A proponent of the old basic emotions theory, and Ekman's supporter, would look at these words and say, well, these are just cultural labels for universal feelings.
Right, they'd say everyone feels saudade, the Portuguese just happened to invent a specific word for it. It's just a mix of the basic emotions of sadness and happiness.
Exactly. But Barrett's constructionist account says something much more radical. It says that having the word actually creates the capacity for the specific feeling.
Wait, really? Having the word creates the feeling?
Yes. The concept is the recipe. These aren't just labels, they are distinct emotional configurations. If you grow up in Denmark, you are actively taught the concept of hygge. Your brain learns to recognize the specific intersection of a cold winter night, a warm fire, the presence of good friends, and your internal physiological comfort. And it categorizes that entire complex state as hygge.
So it groups all those signals together into one specific emotional experience.
Exactly. If you don't have that concept, if you grew up in America, you might just feel vaguely nice or comfortable in that exact same situation. You lack the specific emotional granularity that the Danish culture provides.
This speaks directly to anyone who is learning a new language or living in a multilingual household. English emotional vocabulary is just one specific set of tools. It is not the full spectrum of human experience.
Not even close.
When you learn German or Japanese or Portuguese, you aren't just memorizing syntax and grammar rules so you can order a coffee. You are acquiring new emotional concepts. You are giving your brain new recipes to categorize your internal physical states.
You are expanding your emotional toolkit, which means you are literally expanding your biological capacity to experience the world. You are rewiring the pathways your anterior insula uses to make sense of your interoception.
That is incredible.
Yeah.
But navigating these cultural tools isn't just a fun academic exercise for polyglots, you know? It has serious implications. Because these cultural concepts dictate how we are expected to act in the world. They dictate how we are perceived by society.
They do. And this brings us to the specific culture of the English language and what sociologists call display rules.
Display rules. Every culture has unwritten norms governing emotional expression.
Right. These display rules dictate who is allowed to show which emotion at what intensity and in what context. And the English-speaking world, particularly in North America and the UK, operates under a deeply fascinating, honestly somewhat contradictory set of rules.
It's a massive contradiction. On one hand, modern English-speaking cultures highly prize emotional authenticity. There is this huge cultural emphasis on being genuine, on being true to yourself, on speaking your truth. You are expected to be in touch with your feelings.
But that mandate for authenticity directly collides with the other massive English emotional restraint.
The famous stiff upper lip, keeping it together. The expectation of professionalism.
Exactly. The expectation, especially in public, in workplaces, or in formal settings, is that strong emotions are inappropriate. They are viewed as messy, disruptive, or unprofessional. So you have this intense tightrope walk. You are supposed to honor your authentic emotional self, but you are required to perform the socially appropriate, restrained, neutral self in public.
This is exactly why expressive suppression is so common in our workplaces. We are constantly forced to hide our reactions to maintain the display rule of professionalism.
It's exhausting.
And think about how alienating this can be for non-native English speakers coming from cultures with completely different display rules. If you come from a Mediterranean culture or a Latin American culture where loud, expressive frustration or passionate debate is considered a healthy, normal part of group problem solving, the American workplace norm of silent, restrained composure can feel incredibly cold, fake, or even hostile.
And this tension over display rules actually reveals a much deeper philosophical assumption built into Western culture. It stems from the classical rational choice model.
The idea that emotion is the enemy of reason.
Yes. For centuries, dating back to Plato and the Enlightenment thinkers, Western thought has operated on the assumption that emotions are just irrational noise.
The idea that logic and reason are the pure, higher functions of the human mind, and emotions are this primitive, animalistic interference that good decision-making needs to overcome, the ultimate Vulcan ideal. Pure logic, zero emotion, perfect decisions.
It sounds great in theory, right? We have this cultural idolization of the purely rational, unemotional decision maker.
The CEO who never feels anything.
Exactly. But modern neuroscience has completely demolished this idea. And the pioneer here is a neurologist named Antonio Damasio.
Damasio's work is mind-blowing. This is where we get into the somatic marker hypothesis. We really need to break down how this works because it proves that the Vulcan ideal is just biologically impossible.
Damasio worked extensively with a specific subset of patients who had suffered localized brain damage. They had tumors or strokes that damaged a small area called the ventromedial prefrontal cortex.
What does that area do?
This area is crucial because it acts as a major hub connecting the emotional processing centers of the brain, like the amygdala and the insula, with the frontal lobes, which are responsible for complex reasoning and planning.
So their logical brain and their emotional brain were essentially disconnected from each other. What happened to these patients in their real lives?
Clinically speaking, their logical faculties were perfectly intact. If you gave them an IQ test, they scored just as high as they did before the brain damage. They could analyze complex, abstract math problems. They had perfect memory. Their language skills were flawless.
So they were still brilliant.
Yes, but their personal lives were in absolute ruins. They were losing their jobs, going bankrupt, making terrible investments, and their marriages were falling apart.
Why? I mean, if the rational choice model is correct and emotion is just noise, shouldn't removing the emotion make them flawless, Spock-like decision makers?
That is exactly what the classical model would predict. But Damasio discovered something profound. Because of the brain damage, these patients lacked what he called somatic markers.
Somatic meaning of the body.
Right. These markers are the emotional signals, the physical gut feelings that our brains attach to specific outcomes based on our past experiences.
So a somatic marker is that subtle physical sensation of dread you get when you think about trusting someone who lied to you before.
Exactly. To prove this, Damasio used something called the Iowa gambling task. It is a brilliant experiment. Participants are given 4 decks of cards and fake money. They draw cards to win or lose money. Unbeknownst to them, 2 decks are good. They give steady, small wins, and 2 decks are bad. They give big wins, but massive, devastating losses.
How does a healthy person play the game?
A healthy person will start drawing from all the decks. After about 40 or 50 cards, they consciously realize which decks are bad, and they stop drawing from them. But here is the incredible part. Damasio hooked the participants up to machines that measure skin conductance, basically measuring microscopic sweating, which is a sign of physical stress.
Interoceptive arousal.
Yes. And he found that in healthy people, their bodies started reacting to the bad decks after only 10 cards.
Only 10, so way before they actually figured it out logically.
Long before their conscious, logical brain had figured out the math, their body was generating a somatic marker. Every time they reached for the bad deck, they got a tiny stress response, a gut feeling. And that physical feeling guided their behavior away from the bad decks before they even knew why.
And the patients with the ventromedial prefrontal damage, what did they do?
They never developed the physical stress response. They never generated the somatic markers. So even when they played the game long enough to consciously, logically figure out that the bad decks were losing them money, they kept drawing from them anyway.
Wait, they knew they were bad but still drew from them?
Yes. They would intellectually know it was a bad idea, but they didn't feel the risk, so they couldn't stop themselves.
That is staggering. When these patients faced a decision in real life, say, something as simple as choosing which restaurant to go to for dinner or scheduling their next appointment, they could logically map out every single variable. The distance, the price, the menu options.
But without the emotional somatic markers to say, I feel like having Italian, or that place feels too noisy, they couldn't actually make a choice.
They would just descend into open-ended, endless deliberation. They would spend 2 hours logically weighing the pros and cons of 2 identical dates for an appointment and never reach a conclusion. They lacked the emotional weight required to tip the scales of logic.
Without emotions, we wouldn't be purely rational decision makers. We would just be paralyzed biological computers, endlessly running calculations until we starved to death in the cereal aisle because we couldn't logically prove whether Cheerios or cornflakes were the optimal choice.
Damasio's work proves, once and for all, that emotions are not irrational noise. They are incredibly dense, highly evolved informational signals. They carry experientially derived knowledge about value, risk, and priority. The abstract, logical knowledge of risk is not enough. You need the physical feeling of risk to actually guide your behavior.
Which brings us to the ultimate takeaway of this entire journey. The goal is not pure rationalism, suppressing our feelings like a robot. And the goal is not unthinking, unfiltered emotional outbursts where we are hostage to every racing heartbeat. The goal is emotional literacy.
Emotional literacy means recognizing that our emotions are data. They are constructed predictions based on our bodily states and our cultural concepts, and they are essential compasses for navigating our lives. We shouldn't ignore them, and we shouldn't blindly defer to them. We need to read them.
Cultivating that literacy is the practical application of everything we've discussed today.
What an absolute journey this has been. Let's recap where we've been, because we have covered a massive amount of ground. We started with the intuitive idea that emotions are just automatic reactions to the world. Then we explored the century-old James Lange theory that flipped the script, arguing our physical bodies react first. We examined Paul Ekman's basic emotions paradigm, the deeply comforting idea of 6 universal facial expressions hardwired into our biology.
And then we saw how methodology matters, as Lisa Feldman Barrett's work dismantled that universality by removing the multiple choice crutch.
We explored her theory of constructed emotion, the idea that our brains use predictive processing to categorize our physical states based on cultural recipes. We navigated the shifting landscape of neuroscience, leaving the myth of the limbic system behind to understand the amygdala as a relevance detector and the anterior insula as the physical bridge for our interoceptive feelings.
We saw the immense, life-altering practical value of emotional granularity, how having a precise vocabulary allows you to use cognitive reappraisal to lower your physical stress, rather than relying on the exhausting strategy of expressive suppression.
And finally, we explored the cultural toolkit, how specific languages give us specific emotional concepts, how English display rules create tension in our workplaces, and how Damasio's research on somatic markers proves that without these emotional signals, logic alone leaves us completely paralyzed. We have gone from thinking of emotions as a clean, simple reflex to understanding that human feeling is a dynamic, beautifully complex, constructed masterpiece.
And it leaves us with a truly profound implication, especially for anyone navigating multiple cultures or learning a new language. If emotions are actively constructed using the concepts our culture and our language provide, then when you become truly fluent in a second language, when you internalize concepts like schadenfreude or mem or higge so deeply that you don't even have to translate them anymore, are you just changing how you speak, or are you fundamentally expanding the biological limits of what you are capable of feeling?
Are you building new biological capacity? I absolutely love that thought. It changes how you view every conversation you have. Thank you so much for taking this deep dive with us today. Keep questioning the obvious, keep expanding your emotional toolkit, and we will see you next time.